주말임에도 불구하고 이렇게 찾아주신 여러분 정말 감사드립니다. 본 행사는 그 서스펜스의 도시 워치앤칠 3.0 전시의 연계 프로그램으로 기획되었고요. 그래서 그 이번이 두 번째 행사 시간입니다. 어제 그 정재경 작가의 어느 장면이라는 퍼포먼스, 라이브 퍼포먼스로 그 연극 실현을 보셨는데요. 오늘은 이제 두 번째 시간이자 총 기획되어 있는 세 번의 대담의 첫 번째 시간으로 큐레토리얼의 탈중앙화, 디지털 미디어와 동시적 공간들이라는 주제로 가장 의미 있는 것은 지금 지난 시즌 1, 2, 3를 같이 협업했었던 9명의 그 협력 큐레이터들을 모두 한 자리에 모았습니다. 저 사실 오늘 아침에 이 모든 분들을 한 자리에 만나면서 굉장히 좀 감정적이 되었는데, 그 팬데믹 시기 때 아무도 만날 수 없는 그런 상황에서 정말 줌으로 서로 괜찮냐고 물어보던 그 안부에서 시작한 이 프로젝트가 어느 정도 이제 팬데믹이 조금 완화되고 실제로 이렇게 대면을 처음 얼굴을 보는 분들이 대부분이거든요. 그래서 정말 인텐스하게 일을 했지만 실제로 만날 수 없었던 그런 상황에서 실제로 이제 안을 수 있고 만질 수 있는 이제 이런 상황이 된 것이 좀 되게 감격스럽게 좀 다가왔어요. 그래서 또 이제 여러분들이 모인 만큼 또 지난 3년간 이제 워치앤칠이 어떤 방식으로 변화했는지 보셨었던 관객분들이 많으실 것 같아서 또 궁금하신 점도 있을 것 같아요. 그래서 저희가 이제 Q&A 시간을 좀 이렇게 많이 할애를 했거든요. 그래서 좀 적극적으로 질문도 해주시고 또 뭐 크리틱도 해주시고 네, 여러 가지 의견을 좀 주시면 감사하겠습니다. 그럼 하우스키핑을 위한 이야기를 좀 하자면 이 행사는 이제 6시까지 4시간에 걸쳐서 진행이 되고요. 그 이유는 이제 저희가 9명의 이제 큐레이터들을 한 자리에 모으다 보니까 이제 너무 무대가 꽉 찰 것을 우려해서 이제 두 번의 세션으로 나눴어요. 그래서 세션 1에 이제 그 시즌 1, 2, 3의 이제 큐레이터 분들을 좀 이렇게 고루 안배를 했고, 그다음에 세션 2도 이제 4시부터 이제 진행이 될 예정입니다. 그리고 이 행사는 지금 라이브 송출은 안 되고 있고 녹화를 하고 있거든요. 그래서 이 행사 끝 후에 편집한 다음에 저희 국립현대미술관 유튜브 채널에 올라갈 예정이니까 또 혹시 다시 듣고 싶으신 분들은 그렇게 또 찾아주시면 감사하겠습니다. 네, 그러면 간단하게 워치앤칠 소개를 하고 이제 그 토크로 들어갈 텐데요. 네, 워치앤칠은 뭐 여러분 많이 보셨겠지만 이제 아까 말씀드린 대로 팬데믹 시기에 그 미술관이 이제 문을 닫고 그 미디어 콜렉션을 뭔가 또 유동적인 방식으로 공유할 수 있는 방법 없을까라고 상상을 하다가 그 해외에 있는 미술관들과 같이 이제 협력을 해서 온라인 스트리밍 플랫폼을 만들고, 그것이 온라인뿐만이 아니라 오프라인에서도 어떤 하이브리드 형식으로 이렇게 각기 다른 방식으로 보여줄 수 있는 국제 협력 모델을 만든 것입니다. 그래서 첫 번째 시즌에는 아시아 국가의 4개의 미술관과 협업을 했고요. 그리고 네, 여기 보시는 것이 시즌 1의 스트리밍 아트 your homes에서 네, 워치앤칠, 우리 집에서 워치앤칠, 이제 이런 그 한국어로는 그런 제목을 가지고 집의 연결성, 그러니까 가정성이 어떻게 연결로서 다른 형태를 띠는가, 이제 그런 질문들을 했고, 네, 그래서 이렇게 MMCA에서 이런 모습들이 보여지고요. 그다음에 시즌 2에서는 디지털 체계의 디지털 공간 안에서의 우리의 신체적 감각 체계에 대해서 다뤘습니다. 그래서 그 협업자들은 샤르자 미술재단의 네, 후 알카시미, 그 다음에 스톡홀m 아크데스의 제임스 테일러 포스터 큐레이터와 같이 협력을 해서 그 각기 다른 지역의 어떤 그런 콜렉션 및 그리고 지역 작가들을 통해서 우리가 어떻게 이 조금 단절된 그 상황 속에서 우리의 감각과 몸의 어떤 신호들을 나눌 수 있을 것인가에 대한 이야기를 했고요. 그리고 조금 아직 마스크를 쓰고 있을 때지만 약간의 그런 사회적 거리두기가 완화되던 시점이라서 그래서 이런 관객들과 만나는 그런 뭐 ASMR 콘서트라든지 이제 대담회를 통해서 관객들과 직접 만날 수 있는 시간을 이제 갖기 시작했었습니다. 그리고 네, 데이터인데요. 2개의 시즌을 통틀어서 총 3.6만 명이 넘는 사용자가 이제 2개국에서 접속을 했거든요. 저는 데이터가 시사하는 바는 사실은 이제 물리적인 공간에서만 이제 미술 작품을 보여주는 그런 상황이었었으면 절대 가능하지 않았을 이제 그런 것들이, 이것이 이제 어떤 스트리밍 플랫폼이라는 굉장히 요즘에 그 많은 분들이 소비하는 어떤 그런 미디어 현상 혹은 상황 그리고 환경들에 대한 어떤 대응으로서 이제 만들어진 것이기 때문에 좀 다른 방식으로 미술관이 이런 것들을 해석하고 또 이제 자리를 만들 수 있었던 방식이지 않았을까 싶습니다. 그리고 재미있는 것은 이제 그 모바일 사용자가 63.9%로 가장 많았었거든요. 그러니까 사실은 이제 미술관의 어떤 권위적인 예술 작품 감상보다는 조금 더 모빌리티의 사람들이 더 반응했었다는 걸 볼 수 있는 굉장히 흥미로운 데이터였습니다. 그래서 지금 전시되고 있는 서스펜스의 도시 워천칠 3.0이 이제 저희가 3개년을 계획을 하고 이제 있던 마지막 그 시즌으로 전시를 선보이고 있는데요. 협력한 기관들은 멕시코시티의 토노 페스티벌, 그리고 미국 매사추세츠 세일럼의 피바디 에섹스 뮤지엄, 그리고 호주 멜버른의 빅토리아 국립미술관, 이렇게 MMCA까지 4개의 기관에서 서스펜스라는 어떤 그런 몰입, 그리고 어떻게 우리가 그 스토리텔링과 형상화를 통해서 몰입의 감각을 무빙 이미지를 통해서, 그리고 어떤 공간들을 통해서 들어갈 수 있을 것인가, 우리의 시간은 어떤 식으로 반응할 수 있을 것인가, 이제 이런 질문들을 던진 그런 전시라고 할 수 있습니다. 그래서 네, 이거는 여러분들 보셨으니까. 그래서 첫 번째 시즌에 아시아부터 시작해서 중동과 유럽, 그리고 호주와 오세아니아 지역까지 굉장히 모든 그 컨티넨트를 다 다뤘다고는 할 수 없지만 상당히 좀 고른 방식으로 저희가 이제 협력자들을 찾았다라고 볼 수 있을 것 같아요. 네, 그래서 이렇게 브리프하게 워치앤치를 좀 설명을 드리고 이제 여기 오신 스피커 분들을 좀 소개를 해드리겠습니다. 그래서 첫 번째로 이제 호셀리나 크루즈, 필리핀 마닐라의 Museum of Art and Design, MCAD의 디렉터이자 큐레이터인 호셀리나 크루즈시고요. 그리고 그다음에 태국 치앙마이에 있는 마이암 현대미술관의 기티마 차리프라싯 큐레이터이십니다. 이렇게 이 두 분과 사실 이제 watchandchill이라는 그 플랫폼과 이런 온오프라인 하이브리드 개념 자체를 같이 만들었던 분들이기 때문에 또 특히나 또 굉장히 의미 있는 이런 분들이고요. 그다음에 이제 두 번째 시즌을 같이 했었던 스웨덴의 스톡홀름의 국립 디자인 건축센터 아크데스의 제임스 테일러 포스터 큐레이터 소개드립니다. 네. 그래서 시즌2에서는 이런 디지털 감각 체계에 대한 이야기를 하면서 또 굉장히 흥미로운 전시를 저는 이제 기획하셨었거든요. Real Sensation Feels Good이라는 ASMR 전시를 하셔서 그것이 이제 굉장히 적극적으로 우리 프로그램 안으로 들어왔던 좀 흥미로운 케이스였고요. 그다음에 이제 세 번째 시즌, 지금 전시를 하고 있는 그 세 번째 시즌을 같이 협력한 호주 멜버른의 빅토리아 국립미술관의 티모시 모어 큐레이터 소개해드립니다. 네, 그러면 이제 굉장히 짧게 각 그 연사분들이 각 기관에서 어떤 식으로 이제 워치앤칠이 구현되었고 또 이게 각 기관에는 어떤 의미였는지를 조금 아주 짧게 들어보도록 하겠습니다. So we have 3 minutes each. So please make sure that it's concise so that we have more time for conversation. I'll flick it. Okay.
Hello. There. So when Jihoy got in touch with me, we'd known each other before Watch and Chill. No? The proposal came at the moment during the pandemic in the Philippines when the restrictions were very, very hard. Like not only were there restrictions of not being able to go out, there were curfews. So it was very difficult to actually put up a show. So which meant that whilst our museum was open, we did stay open, we were at the mercy of restrictions and social distancing and restrictions of not being able to open to the public and having visitors come. So any decision to put up an exhibition meant that we needed to double the effort with half the funding. So it came up at a very good time when MMCA actually said we could actually give you a bit of funding, so that was very good for us. While we were thinking through the proposal and what we could do, we really did think of, we were already thinking of which artists to include. And I spoke with my team, and we decided that because it was so difficult to put up a show in the museum, we decided to put up a drive-in theater. And the drive-in theater actually solved many things because everybody could just drive in. You didn't need to have any restrictions. And we used the old drive-in theater system where we had a FM what do you call it, transformer, and we actually used that. So people really did not go out of the cars, and that was such an amazing way to open up the museum and the project in the Philippines. The response to the so we fixed up a parking space which was beside the museum. We had to cut down grass and everything, and build up a screen. And instead of just having people drive into the parking space, because we are part of a community in a residential area in Manila, we were able to, as you can see in the images, we could actually put up seats, and people could come in from the neighbors and listen to and watch the films. No? And what happened was, because there had been a restriction of movie theaters had not been available for people for almost a year and a half, we were able to have a lot of audience, and the response was amazing. So I think it's ready. Kitima, that was my 3 minutes.
Hi. I really like that word though. Hi, this is me, Kitima. Actually, like my exhibition was the third exhibition on Q from Watch and Chill. So the first one is at MMCA, and the second one is at Manila. So I actually took these two format of the exhibition from these two wonderful curator. So like at MMCA, as you see, there's a beautiful exhibition design of these circular theater things. So actually talking to our local architect and thinking about like, okay, I want to do an outdoor cinema things, because in Thailand, the restriction of the COVID is not really serious as in Manila. But in the way, we still have a bit of social distancing. So I want to make these outdoor cinema things by inspiring by that design idea of the MMCA exhibition, which is also circular. And also I take the format of screening program from MMCA, from MCAD. MCAD curator, and your team actually form a really interesting like screening time. So like each in our streaming art to your home, we have 3 different sub themes. So we decide to make it as a screening program every Friday, Saturday, Sunday as a weekend kind of like program for audience to come enjoy, see the program outdoor. And thank you for the funding from MMCA. It's actually make us have a year long after the Watch and Chill finish. I actually dedicate that screening circle outdoor platform for a younger artist, a local younger artist to come to use that platform for their screening. So like if any of the local artists want to use that outdoor theater, that can just like pop in and like making a program and screen and asking that friend to come over and see the work. And actually it's been like quite interesting for us to having these kind of like community screening space, and in the same time it's quite comfort, like with these foam seat. It's just like kind of like laying down. We actually doing a lot of program here. We having a talk program, discussion program, and the screening program at the same time. So this is how we do it in MAIIAM. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So moving on to another year, 2022, suddenly we are in Watch and Chill 2.0, and far up in the high Arctic, very far away from here in Stockholm, we start to develop a program that is locally grounded and that takes some of the themes on from Watch and Chill streaming senses. Jiho and I were very closely talking particularly about an exhibition that we did at Akhdes in 2020 called Weird Sensation Feels Good, which was one of the first museum exhibitions to explore ASMR, to lift ASMR into the design canon, into the creative field. And of course, through that, we realized one thing, that it's kind of interesting when you bring completely radical new topics that no one expects into the museum. So along those lines, we started to develop a program called The Limits of Our World. And The Limits of Our World lasted a day, a very intense day, in which it pulled together a whole group of people to explore the idea of the live action role play. The live action role play is essentially a highly empathetic, highly sensual process, very popular in Europe, growing in it has different strands all around the world, where essentially it's like a video game, except you are in the video game. The video game is real. You become a character. There are cities and towns across Sweden in which people go for months. Some of them are medieval, some of them are fantasy. But we gathered together a whole group of people ranging from artists looking at decentralized practice, using live action role play to speculate on a different world, a world without capitalism, for example. Imagine that. But also people who do scripted live action role plays to start to understand what is this a form of design? Is this a form of creativity? What kind of a world are we living in right now? And what kind of a world do we want to live in? This was complemented by a series of intense screenings at the museum of the works in Watch and Chill, which included, especially from my side, works of ASMR. Some of these pieces are 2.5 hours long. And you might be familiar with some. I mean, I was extremely, extremely jealous to miss the ASMR program that you had here, because of course, ASMR is one of those sort of conceptually new, extremely radical, extremely important things that tell us so much about the ways in which we're living today. So I'll leave it there.
And lucky last, and I think whether the last iteration of Watch and Chill, which will happen in March 2024 in Australia. So I think the title Streaming Suspense is quite apt because you have to be in a bit of suspend your disbelief of what we're going to do. So I can't really talk about what has happened, but maybe I can preempt what will happen in a way. Maybe just talk to some of the filmmakers as well. So Watch and Chill will happen during the NGV Triennial, which is a mammoth exhibition looking at global storytelling, and in particular, looking at over 100 artists, designers, and collectives that have, with over 25 commissioned new work. It's really polyamorous, the triennial, and by that I mean there's lots of different themes and ideas. That's what I mean, lots of different themes and ideas coming together. And you'll see things from like AI and robotics to tapestry to war to mega cities. There's lots of different conversations happening at once. So taking on that premise is how we looked at how we would curate Watch and Chill within the Streaming Suspense. But actually I was inspired by the Sharjah Out Foundation when I went to the Sharjah Out Foundation in the second series and the other curators as well, realizing that filmmaking could be anything, and there's many different methods and approaches as well. So we kind of took that on board when we started to approach different artists to be within Streaming Suspense. So if you've been downstairs or been online or going there later today, you'll notice definitely with the Australian contributions, there's different approaches, whether it's performance, it's music, and they're trained in performance, or they're trained in music, or they're trained in architecture, they're trained in art making, and just having different disciplinary lenses onto the moving image was really important to us. And we just knew kind of handing over these babies to MMCA and the others, that it would make sense within a broader curatorium or decentralized curatorium.
It's surprisingly we are on time. Amazing. Okay, so moving on to, so that was NGV. Yep. All right, so let's have a conversation now. I guess like I prepare a set of questions so that you would have some structure in our conversation. So the first question would be, and then we're going to have like a 45-minute talk within us, and then we're going to open the question to the audience. So please make sure that you ask us a lot of questions, provocation questions, and so on. Okay, so the idea of decentralized curation was one of the hot topics last year, I would say, instigated by Castel Documenta through articles by Casa de Povo and Gregory Charlotte. For those who's not familiar with what happened at Castel Documenta was that last year was very special in the sense that this Indonesian art collective, Ruang Rupa, brought 14 delegates, art communities, artists, community leaders, to bring another set of friends and artists, art communities. So it happens to be that hundreds of different cacophony of art practices, especially focusing on the global south, was presented in a way that it was in a way that very dynamic, because we have seen so many art practices that was not invisible in a kind of established art world. And so there's a lot of participatory, a lot of rituals, and there's so many of that that are very positive. But also at the same time, it also created this controversy of certain presentation or representation was a little bit beyond the kind of sensical control. So some nuances were sort of delivered in a kind of wrongly manner, and it was some people like misunderstood. So it became a little bit chaotic also. So given the fact that like there's this controversy, as a defense to this very method of curatorial practice, the article by Casa de Povo and Gregory Charlotte brought up a very interesting set of questions about this unconventional way of exhibition making. By, I quote, intentionally decentralizing the curatorial authority by inviting a cluster of, this is my word, other curatorial authorships. So, of course, the decentralization of decision-making can imply a partial loss of control. So I guess like just to kind of pose the question to you guys, to what extent did you allow this process of losing control to be fruitful or meaningful or not to your own institutional response to the project? Yeah.
I can start. I mean, I think there are many, many ways to curate. And I think that that is a very important thing to acknowledge, because there are so many curatorial practices that, or so many curators that define themselves on one method, on one format, and then they try to adapt people and projects and objects around that. And I think that that's completely ridiculous and actually super anachronistic and pointless. What I think has been constructed a little bit in this is the start of a space which is defined by the most important thing related to curatorial practice, which is trust. And that trust comes, first of all, from the MMCA, right? In this context, to sort of say like, hey, what about this? What do you think? And for that conversation to unfold, and then suddenly for it to land in a way that maybe could not have been imagined at the start, like a way that is sort of locally grounded, a way that is adapted to the kind of visitors and processes of the institution in which it's going into, the way that people engage with stuff. That is very rare, actually. And it's very different to Documenta as well, in a way. And it's like, this is why I think this is somehow actually a really important conversation to be having, because there is something in this process that can be teased out that is extremely relevant. Of course, it also embraces a certain kind of failure. It embraces a certain kind of confusion. But you know, if you give trust, you get trust back. It's reciprocal. It's like one of those obvious things that sometimes we all forget, is that trust is reciprocal. And in these contexts where you have institutions and bureaucracies and processes, it's actually sometimes very difficult to offer trust and to also receive trust and give trust back. So I think that from that perspective, we there is something very important in this kernel that we should address, maybe.
When we talk about trust, I think when an artist actually hands over their work to a curator, immediately there is this trust there. And I think we have to foster this trust that we will care for their work. I mean, we go back to, and I think that was one of the things. And when this project, to have an artist say, okay, I'll let you show my work, and it's going to be shown in 3 other spaces that I'm not even going to be able to go in and engage with. I mean, there's a huge sense of trust there. And when we talk about, we're talking about decentralizing, curating, or I think when we were given the prompt, I think that was more than a prompt when she called us and they still get together. Hey, Jihoy very initially said, let's put something up. It was an interesting moment, I think, for at least the 4 institutions and for ourselves to actually start thinking, well, how are we going to engage with this? Do we want to engage with this? I think that was the first question. And I think those are immediate curatorial steps that we all take at any point in a exhibition project. I guess I'm agreeing that there are more things, but I mean, trust becomes very intrinsic in most successful curatorial projects, and I do think this is one of them. I mean, there are points of failure for sure, but I think,
for example,
oh,
do you
for
want to reveal
example,
anything?
shall we say?
Artists who would reject, like, we don't want to be part of it, or like, I mean, there are cases that, because yeah, I mean, it's the level of the trust that you have on certain institutions, because you also go by the name and like what kind of practice they have been doing. And for some artists, like physicality, the control of physicality is so important that they would not necessarily like want to be part of it. But then, yeah, I mean, like we also embrace the failures as well. Like it's not like we didn't expect that everybody would say yes immediately. So yeah, I mean.
Okay. Hi. Besides from trust and care, I think like a groundwork of like curator is also collaboration, in the sense that we trust your collaborator in the sense, and it's like, and also the part of that you have to understand the context of each institution on the background where you exhibit the work as well. Like for me, I always free to show a lot of work, and as I remembered, as I proposed a couple of the works, and like from comment from Jihoy is like, oh my God, I don't think I can show this work in Korea. I'm like, why? What happened? I was like, there's a video of one artist that they bird in the case, and then they try to let the bird get out of the case, as I remember, right, by itself. But like for some point of view, for some audience, they might feel offended by looking at the bird try to get out of the case as like a torturing of the animals, which I totally understand, like into different context of the audience, that might be something. So you have to kind of like understand these collaborations and trust, like whether like it's going, when it's out of your hand to other institution, when it's your coworker or collaborator will manage to handle it in the institution and with the audience as well. So I think it's also important.
I mean, I agree with everything else that's been said, trust, relationships, but I never felt like I lost control over everything. And I guess one of the premises of this conversation is around decentralizing curatorial, and I feel like, the power and authority, has it been decentralized? It has to other curators around the world, but it hasn't gone down further in a way. So I felt like, and that's fine, and that can be a good thing. There are different methods. So I felt like, therefore, I could retain a sense of control over the project who was curated, because it wasn't really about consensus in the end. It wasn't a consensus where different curators sat together and decided. Each individual made their own decision in a way, and that's where I felt like I had the control, and I love to have control.
Yeah. So it was not democratic.
Not at all.
In that sense, okay. Yeah, it was not democratic in that sense. It was more like one-to-one, but like gathered together. It's very much of that kind of, yeah,
But
like
it's based on
blockchains
mutual
operate.
respect, though. It's based on mutual respect of each other. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's how blockchain works, right? In terms of like decentralizing.
Can't believe you said that.
Sorry. Is it over? Is it not happening anymore?
No, I'm excited to hear what you say next.
It's just more about like, having not the intermediary for trust. You kind of move that out the way, but we still had that kind of intermediary, which is Jihoy in a way, connecting everyone together.
I think it's like an inverted biennale or triennale, you know what I mean? And I think that's actually kind of an important thing that we haven't really spoken about, is that, the whole idea of one of these big events is that you choose a single location and then you gather as many people from around the world, and everyone flies there and ships things and produces. But then this is something else now. Like this is sort of like a project initiated from Seoul, and then it starts to spread. And of course, like Jihoy has the kind of, the kind of curatorial guidance over these kind of, but who knows who maybe I was the third choice. Maybe Agnes was who knows? But, so suddenly then that's also something that I'm quite interested in acknowledging, is that it is also a certain kind of trust to, or relinquishing of control, to suddenly say, well, something is going on 7,000 kilometers away. We're not going to see it. We're just going to see it mediated through photographs or videos or whatever. But that doesn't matter because that event has happened. And I think that there is something sort of relieving about that approach as well, in a time in which, this is also what I'm particularly interested in, topics that are trying to investigate how we are in the world and how we engage with things and with each other. And one of the things that is so obvious to me is that we're moving out of an age where we are forced to be overwhelmed by experiences and by things. And there's something, I think, that sort of is a bit of a sigh of relief in the way that Watch and Chill is constructed.
Yeah. Well, thank you. But
Welcome.
also, yeah, I mean, I guess like we can talk about like the actual like content, the curatorial concepts where, the rule, we had like very basic loose structure, right? So the rule of the game was that I would come up with a loose structure of like some concepts and categories based on the MMCA collection, actually. And then the partnering institution could respond, critique, and suggest artists and their works that would make sense in a specific constellation of each season. So yes, maybe like we can talk about like those, like the actual like contents in a way that like how this process was helpful, or how do you think that such loose curatorial structure worked out in your experience of participating in this decentralized curation?
When you gave us that prompt, I mean, we were in the midst of the pandemic. I mean, I can't get out of that context because we were deep in it. And most of the artists had not been able to do any new work. So we were working with artists who'd not been able to go to, or were stuck in their studios. For filmmakers who'd not been able to meet with their teams or anything. So it was really a challenge to work with the project in many, many levels. Of course, during the time, it was like, oh, wow, are we even going to do it? I have to tell you that when this came up, I had to consult with my team, who by now it was bare bones, really. And I did ask them, we did have a sort of like a consultative moment where, what are we going to do? Are we actually going to do this? Are we going to engage with this? And they did say, yes, we should, because we need to keep the museum open, because that gives a sense of normalcy to an incredibly difficult time in Manila, at least at that time, no? So we had to reach out to artists who actually were working during the pandemic. As you could see in the projects that we proposed. We proposed 3. One of them was not done during the pandemic, but I thought it was very interesting because it was about a blind woman. It was this reverse of a film that's made by an artist, and was thinking through the idea of light, and was reversing the whole thing by filming using what do you call it? The night film, night vision. And he filmed it with a woman reading a book, with a blind woman reading a braille. So it was I thought that was quite interesting to put in, because it was the time when it was very dark. I mean, it's very metaphoric of what was going on during the pandemic. But then I also engaged with 2 other artists who had worked during the pandemic. One of them was Mark Salvatos, who worked doing a video diary of his boring days at home, basically with his child, and just sort of trying to put together what it was to live through the pandemic. And the other one was Shireen Seno, who did this beautiful work on residency. And the residency was using the archive in, I don't know which institute it was. I guess it was a German.
In the DC.
Yes.
I think.
Yeah. Oh, yes. She was working on the
Library
of Congress archives, and she put together this beautiful work, which was commenting on ecology. It was all about, and it was just through pictures. She was doing a narrative over the photographs, and I thought that was so beautiful. So I was just really looking at, how do you do anything during a time when everything is closed. So, and it was very interesting speaking to Jihoy about it at that time, because she was very, I mean, it was interesting working with Jihoy because she was like excited about everything. And I'm like, okay, that's really good because we're like in dire straits here in Manila, but hey, that's fantastic. So it was really encouraging to like, yes, Jocelyn, that's really interesting, etc. So it was really,
Quality was really good. Like,
yeah. They were very, very fantastic work at that time. No? So I thought that was such an important moment for us. Now you're going to say something. Yeah. So anyhow, so yeah, that was how it was for us.
It was, yeah, go for it.
Well, I mean, for us, it was fantastic to receive the brief in particular. There's a lot of artists working along these topics around the uncanny, immutable bodies, and it's very appealing in a way because this sense of uncanny, which really resonated with me, is kind of where you see difference in the world, you understand its construction. So I think that appealed to the curatorial team. And I should say the curatorial team is not just me at NGV. There's also Amita Kirpalani and others. So we're our own collective, about 5 or 6 of us within the curatorial team. So that really resonated with me. But also something that Jocelina said before was a big part of the project for us is to kind of loan work over, because arts workers and artists really suffered during the pandemic, and it was a really important opportunity to provide funding as a loans fee to the artists with existing work already. So that was a really great opportunity for us, not just the curatorial premise, the thematics itself, but actually just the opportunity to pay workers has been really important for us, and particularly what we do at NGV as well.
Well, I should turn on my microphone. But yes, it's actually an opportunity to pay an artist. When Jiho told me this, I'm looking through our collection. Actually, our year we divide sub-team into 3 different sub-teams, is to like meta, home, by other being, and living rooms. So it's like I'm looking through the artwork in our collection, and then it's turned out that I feel like instead of I should use this opportunity to younger generation artists, emerging artists, it should be a stage for them to explore their work to international level. So instead of like using everything from our collection, I try to reach out the artists and we acquiring artwork. And it's an excuse for me to like buy new artwork, put it into the collection just for doing a watch and show. And it's a hard time for the artists as well to find a living. And this is kind of like the screening fee, the cost of the artwork is actually help extend people during this hard time of pandemic.
Yeah, it's true. And I think that like, from our perspective, it was also interesting to be able to have the opportunity to bring artists in to a context which they have never been in before. One of those cases was ASM Arctica, who is a Swedish ASM artist, Sweden's biggest ASM artist, actually, who I've built a relationship over the last few years. I remember when I think I first contacted them to be part of an exhibition, they thought it was a spam email, right? They were like, why would you, that doesn't make any sense. But of course, by the time we got to this point, there was suddenly like an understanding, a growing understanding that no, this work, the work I do in my studio, in my evenings, is relevant in this massive international context. And so that's sort of one case. And then more established artists like Technoflesh, Simone Nikhil, who created this incredible work, Homeschool, which follows a kind of AI robot around this hyperconstructed space. That work is something completely different. And so to be able to also, I think, put these kind of works in conversation with works from Korea or from Sharjah, or from the UAE, which I have no understanding of or no experience of personally, is very interesting, because that puts a very interesting context in the room itself, for the visitor, to try to draw those lines between 3 completely randomly selected geographies, in a sense, and 3 different worlds, and start to understand that there are differences and there are similarities.
yeah, I mean, I think that was my next question about like the differences. But I also want to kind of comment very shortly that I am very proud the fact that we managed to translate the 2.5-hour ASMR video with Korean subtitles. It was in itself it was a piece of artwork.
That is quite incredible.
And I think the subtitle maker is here actually in the audience. But yeah, we'll hear from him later.
Jihoy, I do have a question for you. My question is, how did you choose which institutions to work with, or which countries to work with, I mean, I know at some point that, oh, we're going to do Watch and Chill 2. You were very excited about it. But
Yeah, I mean, when I started, I wanted to make sure that it starts in Asia, because I don't know, like MMCA is in Asia, but also kind of like wanted to create this sort of platform with the neighboring countries first, and to kind of see, and I think Asia was in very particular situation with the pandemic, and we have like this shared terrain of like, yeah, like, I mean, also the government control and various kinds of ways. So, and also like this streaming platform, as you can think of, is very kind of Americanized platform. And so I, as an alternative or kind of critique to the existing model, like OTT model, I kind of wanted to do it from within our region. But then, you know, like, we should not stop there. And so I kind of like in the second season to the third, I wanted to kind of reach out to the broader and other part of the world. And I must say, as James said, like I reach out to so many institutions, and they reach out to me like later, and then they wanted to do another season, but then like sadly the museum is kind of planned for the 3 years. So like other institutions kind of like, oh, aren't you doing 4th season? But yeah, for now, so that's why we're here to kind of talk about like what we should do next.
It's also hard to explain to your own institution, like, and NGV is similar, I think, to the MCA in a way, and it's hard to talk to a large-scale institution and go, hey, Jihoy from MMCA has this idea. It involves like 4 other institutions. They're going to give us content. We don't know exactly what it is. That's actually hard to explain because there's risks involved. And so that's what's been really exciting in a way. And I think circulating back to the point about trust, because it is the MMCA, my institution did trust the project from the beginning.
Yeah, that the trust is both ways. One is that like it is a national museum and it has this kind of own establishment, in terms of, yeah, like we will do the project in the right manner, but also it's kind of light in terms of structure. Like you don't have to do much of the work. You just put like, I don't know, like 5 or 6 artists' work into the mix and see what happens somehow. And obviously there's a lot of like modes of negotiations and within, you know, like artist contracts and all that kind of stuff. But still, I think there's kind of the rigidity and also fluidity that are at play at the same time.
I was kind of interested before about the rejection again, because I didn't realize this was happening, because we just submitted films and then they were accepted. So there has been some issues. I don't know if this is too juicy to talk about now, but like, is that something to talk about? Or?
You mean like the work?
Yeah, like work, were there, like, I think you said artists were, just said no, or?
Well, I mean, we had some like negotiations in the sense that like some artists doesn't want to show the full length of video.
Oh, yeah, okay.
In the streaming platform, even though we have like limited set of time that we will show like for a year, for 6 months, but still it will be, I mean, it's not like YouTube that you can watch. Like you need to dedicate yourself to like providing us an IP address. Yeah. But still.
yes, I remember, because there was one that we couldn't show as a projection. It could only be accessed on.
Yeah.
Was that Hichon?
Yeah.
Yes, Hichon.
And for some artists, the physicality and the control of physicality of the video installation is so important that, like, you know, it's questionable, like whether or not this would play out for him. So that's another element. But also institutional wise, I mean, you know, some themes that I would propose would not be fitted into their context of program and so on. So. Yeah, I mean, there are many failed attempts.
I think also the platform itself, like we should talk about the platform itself a little bit, because, you know, you're asking an artist to basically allow something to be online for a period of time and potentially downloadable, or hackable, or whatever. Like, and that's
not really, but yeah.
No, but exactly, that was covered. But, you know, in theory, that's the risk they see when the invitation comes. They are relinquishing a certain degree of control spatially and digitally over their work, and that's for some people a little bit worrying or a little bit frightening. But I think the platform itself is kind of interesting, like from a design perspective, because it has a different pace, it has a different duration. You know, it's like, and it's not about loading time, that is built in, right? Is that, you know, we're so used to just being able to, like, you think of Netflix. Netflix is designed to get you to the content as quickly as possible. It's like over-suggesting. Every click is instant and stuff like that. This platform, no. There's like built-in pauses. There are built-in messages. There's kind of like little holes that you have to go in to find more information. And then there is also the temporality of it, in so much as the works are not all there at once. They are released over a period of time. maybe we could talk a little bit about that, because that is a fairly, and of course there's this massive, I bring up Netflix because there's obviously some sort of nod to that platform, but it is inherently subverting the way in which we consume media, the way in which we consume works outside of an exhibition space.
I mean, I think that came up in our our session, you know. So the fact that there were some works that we couldn't run because they were running for more than 2 hours. And we didn't think people would stay in the parking lot for 2 hours watching like an entire film and several. So we did have to figure out ways of how to still have people come. So there was one point that we only had one work running for one day. And that was quite interesting as well. But to try to navigate between because you would suppose that everybody would get the same content of what they would get going into the physical space and online, but we couldn't. No. It was just, there were some things we had to grapple with. And those were very interesting moments, I thought, no? But sometimes you just like, you have to scratch your head and say, come on, like, please, let's just figure this out and see if it's possible.
Yeah. But this is this hybridity that becomes really, really interesting. Because of course, one thing that the pandemic manifested itself in very different ways in different parts of the world. And of course, like I sit here as Sweden's response to the pandemic was very, very different.
Herd immunity.
Yeah, I mean, who knows? Time will tell about what happened. But the short of it is that there was no lockdowns, there was no mandated mask wearing, and in this tiny country in the north, we did the exact opposite of every other country. And that actually constructed a very strange situation. Of course, we could go into great depth about this, but you know, Sweden is a place in which a lot of individual responsibility is placed on the citizen or the resident, as opposed to sort of government mandate. But of course, as an institution, we responded individually to that. And I think that when the pandemic first started, it sort of arrived in Sweden around April 2020, which was around the time that we were opening Weird Sensation Feels Good, this exhibition about ASMR. And it was complete confusion, not necessarily in the confusion that other people were sensing, but the confusion as to the fact that we had to respond in our own way. And we had to sort of lead that response. And I remember making the deliberate choice to not do what I was seeing happening everywhere else, which is that institutions, cultural institutions around the world were suddenly taking their phones out and doing shaky Instagram lives of like Matisse paintings or whatever. And so it was like suddenly everybody's like social media feeds were sort of saturated by these terrible attempts to mediate outwards. And so we said at the time, no, okay, we're going to do a 1 hour and a half fully filmed TV show that will be broadcast live, and that's it. And it was interesting because that was extremely popular. And so that initial thing, I think, starts to lead us to this point where we start to understand that hybridity is possible, but they are two very, very different things. Visiting these galleries and seeing the exhibition now is a completely different experience to seeing it online. And we have to acknowledge there is a complete difference. There can be a conceptual framework or an umbrella, but they are two very different experiences. And I think it's very helpful to start to think of them as two radically different experiences. And I think the design of the platform that you made also shows that, right? It is completely different to the experience of the room itself.
You know, on the online platform, there's an intimacy within your own home, but also there's a sense of humor as well with the UX design of the platform, which is really pleasurable. So you don't feel alone. And maybe that was when you're watching it in 2020, 21 as well. And then I think, as James said, it's quite extreme. Then when you go to the exhibition, which is beautifully designed right in a way, like you kind of go into this other world, this alternate world, and then exit through the green doors, like it says go at the end, and you start off with red to stop. And it doesn't have that intimacy, the design, and that's fine. It's a completely different kind of experiential feeling going there.
Intimacy was an important element also that you'd see. It's totally different, as you said. I mean, when you go to an exhibition, you always have this crowd dynamic, and if there's like some people like gathered around and you're like curious whether or not you have to go there, and if you're watching a film and you kind of want to leave and there's somebody who's like so seriously watching it, then you feel like you should not leave. And so you don't have that kind of like parameter, like you can always pause the video if you want to. And so, yeah, I think it's kind of provided this an option also for media exhibitions that you feels pressure to like watch it, but also like it's kind of so difficult to watch like an hour video in an exhibition setting. So you have a glimpse of it, like a pop-up store or showcases, and then you have also this possibility of watching it if you want to watch it in transit or at home and things like that.
I just want to go back to what Tim said about James, about Timothy. No, the James. Sorry, you're not wearing your things.
No, sorry, I'm not wearing my.
Confusing
my
me.
name pad.
So anyhow,
apologize.
about the frustration of during the pandemic, everybody just was so desperately trying to get all their content out because nobody was coming in. And then Jihoy, we do Watch and Chill, and I have to just say that because of this, we did do, not directly, but I think unconsciously, we started thinking of putting together an exhibition. We did do it with an artist, and we sort of turned around the idea of exhibition making by doing an entire exhibition online. That was sort of like a gamified work by this artist, but it was not a game. It was like, it's many things. It's still running just in case you want to see it. And then thought, how could we make this in the space? So this is sort of like thinking in the same way, but putting it on top of its head, the work. I would like the practice of Watch and Chill. So this actually was productive for us into thinking, how are we going out of the pandemic, learning, having lessons of what we did during the pandemic, because we can't like just say, okay, it's done and over with, and bye, ciao, we go on. I think we have to learn from it. And I think for places that are not Sweden, we actually have a different experience of it.
Yeah, but this is the thinking that I think Watch and Chill necessitates. And I mean, I've been long convinced that an exhibition is a social space. It's not anything more than that. Everything is secondary to that. Objects, unfortunately, are secondary to that. Like a museum is also a social space. If a museum doesn't have a really good cafe and really good toilets, there is no point in it existing, because that is what they are. When we go into an exhibition, and I really do believe, I don't know whether I'm just really naive, actually, but like I do think that when you come to an exhibition, there are all these kind of behavioral codes, no? How many people are gathered around that thing? Like, is there a bench there? Well, if there's a bench there, maybe I can sit down, it's a longer piece, Like, how long is the text? What is the tonality of the space? What is the character of the environment? And you can't reconstruct that sociality on a digital platform. So you have to go one of two ways. You have to embed that sociality in a kind of like online version of what it could be, or you have to ignore that sociality and make it a very one-on-one intimate experience. And I think we're all very confused as to which one is better. I don't think any way really works. And I think that the platform is very good, but it's not totally successful. It's one of the greatest steps forward I've seen in the last few years, but we've still got a lot to learn about how people mediate. And I think just seeing the diagrams that you were showing, the amount of people who viewed it on mobile as opposed to desktop, I mean, those are two very radically different experiences, no?
No, just like adding from you, like I actually changed the sentiment of like watching these video art together. I feel like it's actually torturing experience together, like torturing, watching like 2 hour video together in the same place. Torture. It's quite like that's why it's like social space. So instead of having it inside the museum, I think it's better to watching this video art 2 hour outside with beer. So I make it, I intentionally make it like an outdoor space. It's the bridge between cafe and museum, and then we set up this screening and like, everyone, feel free to get beer and watching this 2 hour video together. I think it's like better.
You can also watch it alone at home with beer as well.
That's true. But
in your bed.
But it's like, as you say, it's social and like practice together.
Yeah, but I mean, for me, it's super exciting to also think about like engaging with this like very serious work, or work that you're not really sure what it is, while washing up, like washing the dishes, or while like putting on your makeup, or like actually that is this domesticated experience of art is what the platform is allowing for. And I wish we knew how people were engaging with this art, because it's a less codified environment.
And actually, there was a kind of like satellite projects, as you might have noticed, that in first and second season, the third one is coming up, that there's The Tales I Tell. I collaborated with this MMC curator, Unju Lee, who could, that we commissioned some writers, curators, and artists who would like basically write a journal of like how they experience this platform. So like one would say like, on such and such a date, and I turned it on and my kid was crying, so I have to like go and take care of him and then come back and watch it again. And then I was like slow pacing it, and then like fast forwarding it. And so there's a way in which that I kind of wanted to, stimulate those crowd dynamics if it's not like in that physical space, to kind of see like, oh yeah, this is like how people will respond to it. And also kind of, I would say, sort of commissioned comments, because like it's so dangerous to kind of put the comment to the public and just you don't know what's gonna come up.
I'd forgotten about this, but I did. Those were some of the most enjoyable bits of the platform. I thought, at least, no, not while I was putting makeup on or whatever, but I actually was seriously looking through it, and I did enjoy those little insertions into the platform because it's a totally different voice, which is disembodied and not disembodied at the same time.
Later, those texts were included in the exhibition catalog, so that this is a whole different set of questions, that like after each season we publish a book, right? I mean, instead of like having any kind of digital archive, because in a way that it works momentarily when it exists, but like there's no evidence that like this digital media would last forever. So like only kind of proved media that we know of to store knowledge is physical publication. And so very ironically, we kind of like worked around the idea of like, just make a physical copy somehow. Yeah.
But that's also the interesting question of hybridity, is like, what do you select? If you're going to do something hybrid. And I mean, I don't know, I might not have made a book, but I do think it's interesting that a book is made, because also that translation graphically, that translation of thing, that also starts in a sense, the whole thing is just translations. And I just wanted to make that point.
Okay, now we have.
This clock is ticking. I don't know.
So like, I mean, there's one more question I can have, like, and then we can put it up to the floor. So I guess let's talk about like simultaneity, or maybe simultaneous spaces. So pandemic completely disrupted the distance in a way that was unimaginable before, as you mentioned. And I think it was initiated with this very humanistic approach to your colleagues, asking how they are doing in a difficult time. So this normalized long distance communication was in effect at play for Watch and Chill in a very serious manner. And one of the interesting things we discussed during our pre-meeting session was how much these spontaneous spaces triggered by digital communication made us notice our differences rather than sameness in a certain extent. And maybe, can you share some of that episodes of this matter? Like how you felt like it was so different? Or was it same?
No, I mean, I'm also fairly, well, there's two things here. Like one is this simultaneity of processes, which is very geographically spread, as you mentioned, also creates these nodes, right? And of course, I'm super indebted also to my colleague, Suji Lee, who was part of this process, and like we were looking at each other and we were like, what do these themes mean? How can we find works from our side that can integrate into this? But then also, secondly, because I mean, Suji is Korean, so it's also interesting because there's a sort of link back and around, but also understanding that we are very far away and we are in a very different context. I'm not Swedish, so that's also the other part to mention. But then to realize that actually, what we realized, I think, very early on was that where we were was very different to where you were. And to understand that the format needed to radically change, not only because of the time in which we were in, but also the kind of visitors which we were receiving and what was going to work in our context. So I think that we've been under this sort of illusion of globalized practices for a long, long time. And I think it really is an illusion. What we can do is collaborate across the world. But if we're going to do that, we have to acknowledge that there is nothing really similar apart from ideas and meaningful relationships. That is what is similar. Everything else is different. And I think it's fine to allow things to land in a very specific way, to allow that, like, tensions and frictions to emerge, because that's the reality.
I was going to say, one thing coming from Australia, we're used to the tyranny of distance, like the distance between places. So we're always collaborating across time zones. Korea's in the same time zone, but it's 10 or 11 hours away. And during the pandemic, I also work in an architecture office, and we're working with a group called Secretary International from Sweden, and also Adam Nathaniel Furman from London. And what was really beautiful during the pandemic was the differences, but because of the different time zones, you'd wake up and you receive an email, or you'll have Adam Nathaniel Furman on the screen, and you can just, it's almost like having breakfast with a lover or someone, when really it's just a collaborator. So what I really liked about the pandemic was just being intertwined with other people. It wasn't an efficient meeting. It was actually about taking care of each other and learning more about each other. So I've really taken that on from the pandemic, and celebrating that as I move forward.
Good time to receive questions from the floor, I think. Are you guys ready? Yeah, I guess. Maybe can you raise your hand if you have a question? It's a bit long conversation. Oh yeah, there is. Is there a microphone?
저는 이제 사실 코로나 이 시대에 전시가 이제 이루어졌던 게 이제 워치앤칠이었는데, 이제는 엔데믹 시대가 왔잖아요, 사실은. 그래서 앞으로 워치앤칠은 어떤 방향으로 나아갈지, 그리고 혹시라도 계획이 있다면 앞으로의 이제 워치앤칠의 그 전시가 어떤 계획을 갖고 있는지, 그게 좀 궁금합니다.
Yeah. I'll respond in Korean. 사실 지금 이 워치앤칠 프로젝트가 아까 처음에 좀 설명을 드렸듯이 3개년으로 이제 계획이 돼서 이 상황이 어떻게 될지 모르는 상황에서 약간 베타런으로 이제 만들어진 거거든요. 그래서 이게 작동하는지 보자 하고 1, 2, 3 개년을 이제 진행하기로 이제 프로젝트가 이니시에이시 됐는데, 그래서 사실은 지금은 알 수 없는 상황이에요. 그래서 이 토크를 만들게 된 것도, 여러분들의 의견을 조금 듣고 싶은 생각도 있었고, 또, 여기서 이제 배운 레슨들이 분명히 있을 것 같아서, 이게 어떻게 꼭 워치앤칠이라는 타이틀이 아니라도 다른 방식으로라도 또 이런 뭐, 국제 협력 모델이라든지 아니면 이렇게 이런 유연한 큐레토리얼의 방법론이라든지 이런 것들이 적용될 수 있을까? 뮤지엄 프로그램 혹은 네, 다른 방식, 협업 방식으로라도. 그래서 그런 이야기를 오늘 좀 하고 싶었고, 현재로서는 조금 뭐 구체적인 내용은 말씀드리기가 조금 어려운 상태입니다. 네. I mean,
What would you do?
만약에 이거 4번째 시즌을 하신다면 어떻게 하고 싶으세요?
사실 저도 생각을 해보지는 못했는데, 이번에 이제 선보인 그 워치앤칠 전시에서 미디어 영상이라든지 이런 게 굉장히 많았잖아요. 그래서 그런 것들을 조금 더 대중이라든지 혹은 아티스트들이랑 같이 뭔가 즐길 수 있는 방향으로 나아갔으면 하는데, 사실 이렇게 저희가 이제 이 현대미술관에 와서 보는 것들은 대부분 그냥 영상을 보고 그냥 그렇구나 하고 이렇게 넘어가는 경우가 많은데, 다음 전시는 직접 아티스트들이 뭐 설명을 한다든지 아니면은 같이 뭔가 좀 게임 속에 뭐 참여를 한다든지 이런 방향으로 하는 게 어떨까 사실 생각을 많이 안 해봐서 즉석으로 얘기를 했습니다. 네.
I think that's very interesting because that is what's possible with hybridity, right? Is it's malleable. It can change. I think that's a very good point.
저도 왓챈치를 1, 2, 3를 계속 본 시리얼 티켓 바이어인데요. 네. 근데 저는 이게 굉장히 스마트한 인벤션이라고 생각을 해요. 코로나 때 이제 수정돼 있는 비디오를 다시 꺼내서 이제 또 다른 미술관들하고 주제별로 엮어가지고 온라인 플랫폼도 너무너무 잘 돼 있고 이게 사실은 이제 뭐 저런 사이트도 있지만 또 네트워크도 있고 트러스트 릴레이션십도 있고 굉장한 엄청난 인벤션이라고 생각을 하거든요. 그래서 첫 번째 보고 이제 그때는 또 되게 마스크 쓰고 이제 다니지도 못할 때여서 되게 좋았어요. 그런데 그냥 MMCA가 너무 여러 행사를 해서 그런지 몰라도 좀 약간 묻혀버리는 혹은 그 와중에도 큰 페인팅이나 뭐 아니면 설치 미술이 있으면은 사람들은 still 그거를 그 앞에 멈춰 있는 그런 거를 볼 때 이게 유틸리테리안한 니즈들은 굉장히 잘 맞춰줬는데 임팩트를 크리에이트하는 데 있어서 그건 그냥 한국의 문제인지 아니면 다른 나라는 어떤지 그게 좀 궁금하기는 해요.
I can only speak for the fact that it happened during the pandemic. Okay, I mean, anything that could be done outside and people could go to was in any way successful. So the fact that people could go out and actually see a film, I think that for us was a bit was quite a success. In our case, as to if they actually did use the platform online, I don't think that was such a big thing. Because if you do, I mean, if you're going to watch anything online, I mean, between videos art videos and Netflix, who's going to win? I mean, I guess Netflix probably going to win 60-40 maybe. I don't know. but for those, for at least for the platform going out with people coming into the drive-in theater, I think we didn't get a lot because people were we were really scared of going out. But those who did go, the feedback was amazing. You know, people, I mean, I had friends who went and they were like, oh my God, it totally blew my mind because the sound was amazing because it was from their own speakers in the car and they could watch and see this. Some of them went for the whole set and they went to watch. Some of them brought out their kids and it was very interesting for us. That for me, I thought was successful. As to how we define successful to be, I think again varies across contexts, and situations and whatever spaces. But yeah, for us it was quite fun. It was amazing. I was very amazed, as to people were coming in their trucks and they were opening the back of their trucks and they were watching with their kids. That was great.
For me, it's like 2 points. I'm sorry. You want to go
Go.
first? The first part is from like perspective of people who are like art worker. For us, it's like in the middle of like a pandemic. It's really hard, especially to doing international event or exhibition. The shipping cost is going crazy if you want to do international level of like the exhibition. Which this watch and chill it opportunity for us to still working and connecting together with other world. And in the same time, it's bringing new things to the local audience. So like it's a chance for us to present these amazing work to Thai audience. And it's because speaking about decentralizing, our museum is not in the capital city of Thailand. It's like 700 kilometers away from the capital. So it's also really happy for the audience from Bangkok to able to see all this work online as well. So in this sense, I feel like I'm happy to still be able to show and share the work with the audience.
I think to address your point about the sort of softness of the launch, the softness of the start, I think it's interesting because the platform has a number of institutions now that have been behind it. These institutions have been around for a long time. When was the MMCA founded?
69, I think.
69. Yep, Akhdes was founded in the 70s. So, you suddenly realize that actually, even in a moment where we want instantaneous success for something, we want instantaneous awareness, things actually do take time. So I think that is also part of the question now, right? Is that, I do think if there's a way for Watch and Chill to continue, even maybe just as an online platform, I think it would be interesting as an experiment to sort of see over the next 3 years what happens, because things also pass around. As much as you can advertise something, things also pass by word of mouth. Someone saying, "Have you checked this thing out? It's actually quite good." That's the best form of advertising we have. So I think that that's maybe an interesting point you make around that. I think things take time.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think back to your point of the softness, it's quite loud now. It's taken over a whole gallery space at MMCA, so it has grown over time. And I think from an institutional perspective, maybe you're dealing with similar things. Where we have Rembrandt on at the moment and Bonnard with India Madhavi. We've got all these large masterpieces on. So when we have to explain to all the other departments, printmaking, fashion, East Asian art, First Nations art, Indigenous art, everything, we have to advocate for this. We know it's really special what we're doing, but it's malleable, it's exciting, it's different. And it's multi-phrenic. There's not one particular story that the media can sell about what we're seeing today in the exhibition space. So I feel like, for me personally, there's a lot of advocacy work internally to get that impact. Did you find that, Ji-Hoi?
I mean, like over the time of 3 years, I mean, you made the point that like the first 2 iterations was in Gallery 6, which is kind of smaller gallery, and then the third season is now in Gallery 5, so we kind of like promoted ourselves a little.
Big time.
So yeah, I mean, started to have this kind of occupancy and that kind of presence in that regard. But also, I don't think that the painting exhibitions and media exhibitions, architecture exhibitions they have their own kind of quality and different level of assessment to understand like what is better way to communicate and which one is better. It's very different context. But also I do acknowledge the fact that like there's some kind of, I wouldn't say like criticism, but there's a comment that because it is so structural and utilitarian, as you say, that the structure appears first than the actual work itself. So that was another way that was getting the feedback from, and which I agree in certain extent, because we really take this. I mean, not to say that like the works are great, and we really put our effort to like make the best way to present each of the work in the exhibition space and also in a platform. But yeah, like, I mean, these modes of practices of this hybridity, the structural hybridity, but also like collaborative method, these became like so important as we started to make it. So I guess to go back to the first question that like, now that pandemic is over, like we're almost, that like, how do you find the fine line between that hybridity? Like, what does it mean now that people really there's a huge desire to be in a physical space, to experience, to touch, and how it can take place, like what would be the next way to have the social engagement in a gallery space and also digital space.
I mean, I think modest beginnings, there's something to say for modest beginnings, and because there's so much interest. I mean, at least I think it was quite exciting, despite the fact that it was very quiet. I mean, it's also a very experimental platform to have this very hybrid space where you're trying things out. You're working with 3 other spaces. You don't know what's going on. There's like restrictions. We were in the middle of rainy season, so we were like people were watching the film while it was raining. So there are all these challenges, and to actually have a 2.0 for this was, I think, was wow, Jihoy, go girl. But but really, I mean, the modesty with which it starts vis-a-vis large-scale work. I mean, like important paintings, Rembrandt, etc., etc. I don't think it should compete directly because it speaks to a totally different set of interests or a demographic that's totally different. That's a different interest in art. It's very interesting. When we had this private conversation on Zoom, and Kitima said, "Oh, everybody just goes to the museum for TikTok or something." And this is a demographic that we have to engage with. And I guess this is something, it's a totally new space that I think Jihoy is trying to work with. And I think it's quite interesting.
And that's ahead of the audience. This is where the audience is going. So NGV's biggest shows are actually not Rembrandt. It is contemporary art from Melbourne or around the world. So that's what the contemporary audience wants to see. And the demographics are changing. And this program is ahead of where the audience is going as well, I think.
I don't know that this is share successful or not, but for me it's a bit successful because like I have a couple of audience knew about the museum. I'm so happy because of the watch and chill. And that's like they knew that that's our museum exists. And then they came over to the museum. I'm so happy. I'm like, I watched the watch and chill. I knew your museum from that. I'm like, wow. Are you serious? I'm like, I'm really happy that's how successful it is, Jihoy.
I think that's a very interesting point as well, because it is about also acknowledging the fact that people in Sweden might not have heard of the MMCA. Yeah. People in Korea might not have heard of Akrdes, right? And so there is this sort of just general awareness happening. I mean, I think that that's also a more nuanced but very, very important thing, and it goes for all the institutions.
안녕하세요. 저는 아까 인사를 잠깐 드렸지만 국립현대미술관에서 20년 넘도록 일한 이제 큐레이터고, 지금 이 watchandchill은 2021년도에 우리 이지혜 연구사와 같이 일했던 사람입니다. 지금은
You made it possible.
지금은 같은 부서에 있지 않지만 너무 자랑스럽고, 이 이제 프로그램이 3년이나 이어져 가지고 성공적으로 이제 마무리 단계에 있는 거 보니까 제가 감개가 무량한데요. 지금 여러분들이 말씀하신 그런 여러 가지 것들 저희도 포함됩니다. 우리 MMC를 어떻게 하면 알릴까? 근데 그 팬데믹 속에서 이제 참 그 어려운 상황이었어요. 그런데 우리 이지혜 연구사가 이 플랫폼, 그 온라인상의 플랫폼을 하고, 또 우리 오프라인에서 또 이것도 같이 하고, 이제 그런 상황 속에서 이제 잘 이끌어져 와가지고 제가 이제 1990년대 말에 들어와서 그때와 지금의 큐레이터 하는 방식과 또 소통하는 방식이 너무나 변했고, 그 변한 방식들이 너무 스마트하고 이제 든든한 그런 느낌을 받고, 다시 한번 우리 이지혜 큐레이터가 잘하고 있는 거에 뿌듯함을 다시 한번 자랑하고 싶고요. 또 여러분들 7분 그동안 이제 온라인 상에서만 뵙다가 이렇게 뵙게 돼서 너무 반갑고, 그리고 여기 이중식 선생님이 말씀하신 그 내용 중에서 국립현대미술관이 많은 행사가 있습니다. 사실 있고, 그 중에서 하나가 watchandchill이 생각보다 안 알려주고 이게 뭘까 하는 우리 관내 직원뿐만 아니라 외부에서도 사실 있어요. 그렇지만 렘브란트, 뭐 피카소 이런 사람들이 자기네들 이름 알리기에는 많은 시간이 걸린 것처럼 watchandchill도 이제 시간이 3년이 흘렀고 앞으로 어떻게 발전할지는 여러분한테 달려 있고, 이렇게 이제 대면을 통해 가지고 MMCA와 오프라인에서도 교류를 하고 플랫폼이 만들어졌으니까 각자의 아이디어가 들어와서 각자의 주제로 우리는 이런 주제로 했으면 좋겠다, 뭐 여러 가지 방식이 있을 수 있다고 봐요. 플랫폼이 형성이 됐으니까. 저는 watchandchill이 플랫폼으로서 사라지지 않길 바라고 이제 그 계속 좀 이어갔으면 좋겠고, 저는 이제 맨 처음에 걱정을 했어요. 온라인만 있으면 오프라인에 어떻게 우리는 제가 하는 이지화랑 하는 이 프로젝트가 알려질 수 있을까? 그래서 오프라인을 강조를 많이 했어요. 우리 MMCA 내에서는. 근데 점차 이제 힘을 가지고 사람들한테 알려지고 여기도 많은 분들이 오셔가지고 얘기를 하는 거 보니까 그동안 투자하고 공력을 들였던 것들이 헛되지 않았구나. 아주 보람이 느껴요. 보람을 느끼고 이런 이제 제가 이제 나가는 세대가 되었기 때문에 이제 퇴임할 때가 다 되었기 때문에 이런 개인적인 감회 이런 것들이 여러분하고 나눌 수 있는 기회가 돼서 기쁘고 제가 이제 마지막으로 질문을 드리고 싶은 거는 이제 이런 반응들 그쪽에 어떻게 설득들 이런 프로젝트를 할 때 그 관내에서 해내는 그 방식들이 절차가 설득하기가 쉬웠는지 또 어떻게 받아들여졌는지 그런 어떤 그 프로세스들이 궁금합니다. 미술관 큐레이터로서. 네, 이상입니다.
감사합니다. 저도 감개무량합니다. 네.
From our space, not much. I mean, I was interested in it from the
director.
I am the director, so I'm like, yeah, sure, whatever we're gonna do, yeah. So it wasn't difficult. I mean, and no, I did speak with my team. I have a very small team. We're a very small team, so I tend to actually speak to them for most of the projects that we have, especially for something that's very experimental or something that I think is going to be challenging for them because we work very closely together, putting up the works, the exhibition itself, everything from nail to nail to book, etc. So yeah, there was not much pushback. I mean, we did put the Hague Young show during pandemic, so it was to be able to put this up was very much supported. The museum, at least MCAD, is part of a educational institution. We're part of a university. So something like this was very important for them. It was actually quite interesting. And it was we were able to actually use the parking space as well because there was no students. So the parking space was open. So they were just more than eager to just, just use it. So yeah, it was easy for us. It was not, there's no pushback. We were excited to actually see how it was going to work. And I did say at the same time, we were also working with AFI, Artist Film International. So we were trying to actually experiment on several different platforms, how to engage with the public across spaces. So yeah.
예, 제가 관장이었다는 걸 몰랐네요. 이제 제가 21년도에 정말 스마트하다고 이지혜한테 여러 번 얘기했어요. 주차장에서 하는 거를. 다시 한번 칭찬드립니다.
I agree.
I agree too. It was very smart. I mean, it was easy because we had to be in bubbles for us to actually do anything in the Philippines. For us to build anything, we had to put workers in bubbles for weeks. It was just, it was, as I said, double the effort with half the funding was not something I was keen on doing.
For us, it's also really good opportunity. Like, honestly speaking, like comparing to a national institution, like we are really small. So if we're thinking about working together, doing traveling show in like a real actual space, it's not going to happen because our space have not able to accommodate like expensive artwork, shipping costs, loan agreement, insurance costs. That never going to happen that me able to working with employers, except that, but it's because of this all digital work and it's like, it's and it's really kind of like up to you format, kind of like how you handle all this artwork, we mutual respect you. So like we propose what we want to do and it's like kind of like good enough to accommodate the work. But all else in any other case is impossible for us to definitely working with this big institution because our facility were not enough to accommodate this like expensive artwork. So for us, it's like yes, a big yes. for like this. No. So I'm really happy for that.
But I think she's being very modest. MAIIAM has really beautiful architecture, and
Thank
also there's like this courtyard that she created. They put up like really beautiful architectural structures that are built with a Pom Studio,
Pom Studio, yeah.
Studio, like this Thailand-based architect, and so. But yeah, I think you did brilliant. Like, yeah.
Thank you. As opportunity for us to work together with local architect as well. So it's a happy project.
Yeah, I think Akhdes is a national museum, but it's a small national museum. It's 35 full-time employees, which is in comparison to I don't know how many employees is NGO.
Thousands, I guess.
Thousands. Smaller than I thought. Yeah. Okay. I have colleagues. I have curatorial colleagues, but so I don't think it was not hard, but it was not easy. Partially because for an institution like us, after the pandemic, everything was delayed. All the spaces were delayed. The schedule was delayed. Things were full. It was like this juggle, this puzzle piece, of things. And then another thing comes. And you're like, how can we possibly do that? But what I think is very advantageous about Watch and Chill is it's kind of slippery. And because it's kind of slippery, it allows you to be a little bit slippery. So how you then fit it in to spaces? So we used spaces that we've never used before for events. Like, I mean, the day of program, the limits of our world, happened in the family space of the museum, and we completely redid a scenography. We actually had a whole technological solution to be able to bring people into that. We brought it, and that was and so we did that, and now suddenly the museum is like, that space really works, actually.
It's beautiful.
And actually, so this project then allows you to sort of behave in a slightly more, I don't know, subversive way in your own institution. And I think that's also a very important point, actually.
To your question, was there any pushback from the institution? I don't think you can really say no to this fabulous curator over here. Like, you just have to say yes to her. But I also, because of her ambition and vision as well, like, it's such a special project, and curatorially, the rest of the team could see that. They could see it was a very special program, not only from a conceptual point of view, but a lot of things that the institution wants to rethink as well, how to engage, particularly in Asia, work collaboratively, have artists from Australia being shown overseas and be introduced to new work and new cultures as well. It was really important. I think working with thousands of people, I should really fact check whether it's thousands now that this has been recorded, but I think you can push the bureaucracy out of the way and just make it work in the end. And once people see that vision, everyone will fall behind you and really support you as well. And James's point around the malleability or slipperiness of the project is true as well, because our spaces are booked 2 or 3 years in advance for shows. So it was really easy. Well, it was not hard to find a space for this project because it's screen-based as well. But, you know, we'd love to try different iterations of it as well, because we'll be showing it in a screening in a cinema over a week, but there's so much potential to explore it in different ways.
The slipperiness is precisely how it was initiated in the MMCA as well. Like, it kind of like initiated as this, oh, we're just doing this light project, you know, it doesn't need huge space. We just need like a small space that we can have some screens, and so, yeah, if it was kind of like a mega structure space, it would have been very difficult to convince, administratively in the museum. But because it has this kind of like lightness and slipperiness and kind of allowing other people to kind of behave their own way, and there's definitely a benefit into that. You want to say something?
Collapse all the works together for Watch and Chill 4. Everything in one go.
Yeah, I don't know what.
So I'm super curious, because I wasn't able to see most of the stuff for 2 and 3. So I'm super curious with all of them, actually, like LARP.
Is there 혹시 다른 질문 있으신가요?
Hi. So 2 days ago, I had the pleasure of appreciating the exhibition, and it's okay. Moment of truth. When I watched, I think it was Pia Bori's Demonic. So when I watched that one, I couldn't help but just leave the building as fast as possible because it was too much challenging to process what exactly was going on. And for me personally, it was interesting because that was when all that happened. I actually lived in the States as a little child. So I could only imagine what if, like my kindergarten or daycare had that kind of a situation. I had to go through that. If there's anyone here who doesn't know what this video is about, do check it out. I'm not going to spoil it for you. But another thing, more structurally speaking, as a curator, what I thought was that considering the nature and the inspiration behind Watch and Chill, say that this was 3 years ago during quarantine, I'm watching this film at home all by myself. And I asked myself, could I bear the affliction afterwards? How do I deal with this situation during quarantine? And I think where I'm trying to get at is, we've been talking about cinema, Netflix, and online streaming, and all these different platforms of watching media, is that for me, I had this conversation really recently with a close artist friend of mine, is that when you go to a cinema or an art museum, the entire experience, for example, you go to a movie, is that you go to this huge room, it's dark, you're in with hundreds of other complete strangers, but you all enjoy the film together, you come out, and then you go to like a nearby pub, have a couple of pints, and the collective appreciation process goes on. I think when it comes to online screening, especially under situations such as quarantine, you can't do that. So for me, it's personally an incomplete experience. And for me personally, therefore, it's not cinema. So my question to you is, throughout the past 3 years of the pandemic, as curators of this project, did you kind of sense that lack of, I don't know, collective thinking and appreciating and the development of discourse related to the artworks? And if that was actually indeed a challenge, what were your, I don't know, like maybe solutions, or what are you thinking about that now in this maybe not endemic phase? Go for it.
Well, I'm guilty of programming Pierre Borg's Demonic into
No,
the
it was
program.
obviously it was a great.
Guilty. No, I mean,
It was
no,
great
but
film,
I
but
think it's a
yeah.
really important point that you do make, and it comes back to this idea of intimacy, but also discourse, banding together, being a collective, being a part of something larger is what we all want to be, a part of a community. And I think it's less challenging for the programming at NGV because we will have cinema screenings, so we'll go for over 10 days. There will be a public programming with the artists, there'll be discussions. So there is that opportunity to walk out and go to the pub across the road. But I also go see cinema alone. Like I go alone and reflect alone. So I really think it depends upon the individual about that experience. But I do take your point that we want to be connected. We want to be together at different points. And I think there is extensive public programming to kind of deal with that comment, I think. I don't know with Joselina in the first year, whether you had a lot of public programming outside of the car park in terms of the connections.
Really, all our public programming during the pandemic was online. Sadly, I mean, we just really couldn't do anything. I mean, we made kites online. We had what do you call the Japanese kites? Anyhow, but we would have our programming online. So for Watch and Chill, we had a couple of discussions, but nothing face to face. But because we did fashion it as a drive-in theater, we actually had groups of friends driving in to watch the whole thing, and a lot of them were artists, of course, who were like screaming to have any experience of art outside of being at home. So we would have artist friends come over, and since it was a parking space and we could only really accommodate around 6 to 8 cars, they'd pile up in the car, and then after the screening they would actually go out to the corner lot, buy some beer, and then go back to the parking area because it was open air. They allowed those moments to happen, and it was a private space. people would actually would bring in drinks, no, but it's not your pub, and they really couldn't stay on for long because of well, because we couldn't, people had to go home at some point. We had to close the parking space after a bit. But yeah, that was the experience we had. But
maybe there's an opportunity in a way, back to your point.
Yeah.
At the moment at NGV, we have a community hall where anyone can book that hall to have a discussion, and we
Yeah.
provide the resources. So we provide the technical support.
Oh, that's amazing.
We provide some curatorial support. It has to be risk-free in a way, but pretty much people can talk about things related to the exhibition or film program, but they develop it themselves, so from the bottom up. And I think what's been really good about Watch and Chill from MMCA, and I'm really appreciative of MMCA, is providing resources for artists. And I think providing resources even in a more decentralized level to the community of filmmakers would be really interesting in a way where you have the curatorial vision of streaming suspense, but then everyone has their own opinion on that, right? And it'd be really great to kind of bring people along to suggest and take over a space, take over the pub at MMCA, or invent the pub at MMCA would be a really great fourth iteration.
I think you raise a really interesting point, actually, that is deeper than this, that is actually connected to big issues around where we all are as people who engage with works of art, and also where we all are as human beings. We're in this kind of ridiculous moment, this like nascent age where technology has been around for 10 years and we still have no clue how to use it or how to interact with it. And I think that what Watch and Chill is not cinema, that's for sure. It's not social media. It's not many things, but that's not to say that it is something either. It's in this sort of like very strange in-between space, which has all sorts of problems attached to it, all sorts of individual experiences can stem from it. You will see, I think, that the works over the 3 seasons have changed considerably in terms of their provocativeness. The first and second, I think, were very, in fact, I mean, the second, which I can speak to most clearly, was clearly trying to calm people down, actually. The works were really chosen, most of them were chosen with the understanding that they would be individually experienced by somebody potentially in a state of mind that might not be able to take a work that maybe is in Watch and Chill season 3. So I think that that's one sort of like curatorial thing, but I do think that what you're pointing out is this strange moment where we really have to start to find the nuance. And I really think that we have to also stop or prevent ourselves from automatically buying into technology as a way of mediation and start to try to reinvent those technologies. And I think that the Watch and Chill platform does actually start to make an attempt to reinvent some of those technologies in small ways, but of course you can't reinvent the whole technology. Now we've got Apple releasing a mixed reality XR headset, which basically means now we're entering into that world whether we like it or not. We're entering into a situation where actually there's another technology that defines another way of experiencing things, and now everyone's going to chase it. And I would like us to stop chasing it. And I would like us to stand still for a little bit. That's the power of museums as well. You can say the museums are a little bit old-fashioned, a little bit stuck in their ways, and I couldn't agree more. It's like I'm fighting that every day, but I also acknowledge that there's a very powerful part to that, the physicality of the space, the duration of it, the kind of concrete walls of it, that sort of means that it has to be a little bit slower. Because actually, I think museums are very good, when they're good at not being in the present, they're good at being in the past and the future simultaneously, and ignoring the present, because the present is actually fairly uninteresting, and it's particularly uninteresting in terms of technology and mediation. So I think you actually raised the critical point, the critical flaw, and the critical potential in this project.
That's really beautiful, though. But then what we do actually do for like this Watch and Chill that we shared before is we know that technology is passed by so fast, and then what happen with people in Thailand is they cannot keep up with the technologies because like the projectors is really expensive, and like these years the artists need this kind of like projector. 2 years after they need something else, and then if we need to keep updating, it's like really hard. So what we do, we make something called like pool of equipment. So we providing all the list of equipment that we have in the museum and share it to every small institution and artist across the country. If they just need to rent this, just take it and sign for like booking for that, and then we send it, ship it back, and they just need to take care of it for us. I think it's something that we can share, especially from that hard time until today. I think it's like the practice that is easy to make and is something that feel like the institutional should supporting the community in some sense.
Yeah, I think there are several points to make, and I think it's very critical questions that you pose that, yeah, like, I mean, watching, like, for instance, this very provocative work like Pierre Bourret at home would instigate some very, like, special kind of, yeah, it would enwrap you in a way that that you wouldn't experience it in a kind of normal everyday setting. And I think that's also something that we wanted to provoke it through this streaming suspense, that like, how do the arts, like contemporary art, occupy your time and space when there's so many video content and constantly kind of, yeah, like make you lose your time. And so like, what would be that kind of immersion, the very specific immersion that would occupy your time? And I think that was one of the questions that we wanted to pose, and through storytelling, through image making. And so that if that provoked you, I guess it's some way it was successful. Yeah, and I think like the hybridity and like, you know, the differences between the social spaces versus individuality. And I think, yeah, like as Timothy said, there's varying way of experiencing an exhibition setting, and like today's event and in the season 2, because we had like some loosening up the social distancing, we managed to do like ASMR concert where everybody like laid down and just kind of started to have the ear orgasms like all together. And so yeah, that was another kind of way that we tried to make some kind of social spaces as an extensions of the watch and chill. Yeah, so, all right. So maybe we have time to receive one more question. So yeah, Taeyong raised his hand.
제가 사실 오늘 약속이 많았는데 이 watchandchill이라는 프로젝트가 너무 멋있어서 약속 다 캔슬하고 왔습니다.
감사합니다.
제가 2016년도에 베니스 비엔날레 준비를 하면서 이 마스멜리온 지온이 그 뉴뮤지엄 아트 디렉터랑 아침을 먹으면서 그런 이야기를 했어요. 우리 큐레이터들이 너무 멋진 그런 철학을 이야기하고 있는데 이런 것들이 세상을 움직이는데 너무 미약한 거예요. 그리고 그 90여 개 넘는 국가관들이 모여서 무언가를 함께 힘을 합치지 않고 서로 경쟁하기 바빴던 것 같고요. 그리고 무엇보다도 2017년도에 전시를 만들고 보니까 그 전시를 만들기 위해서 우리 한국관이 만든, 또 모든 국가관이 만든 쓰레기 양과 이 탄소 발자국 양이 어마어마하다는 걸 알게 됐고요. 그리고 콜렉터들은 요트를 타고 와가지고선 해양 생태계를 파괴하는 모습을 바라보고 있는데 우리 큐레이터들은 그런 거에 대해서 침묵하고 오히려 거기에 아부하기에 바쁘고 배에 승선하기에 바빴던 모습을 발견을 했습니다. 그래서 2019년도에 방탄소년단 BTS 그 회사와 함께 BTS와 함께 세상에 조금 더 따뜻한 그 메시지를 줄 수 있는 전시를 기획할 때 그때 커넥 BTS라는 프로젝트를 기획하게 되는데 그때 당연히 이제 스폰서도 있었고 큰 대기업들도 많이 있었는데 그때 이제 많이 나왔던 얘기가 스펙타클러한 프로젝트를 해야지만 펀드레이징이 될 수 있다는 이야기 많이 하죠. 스펙타클러하게 해야지만 미디어 어텐션도 받을 수 있다고 했는데 그래서 좀 반대를 좀 했어요. 이 부분에 있어서는 이제 BTS도 같은 생각이었었고 가능하면은 5개 도시에서 벌어지고 그 5개 도시를 연결하는 그런 컨텐츠는 지금 watchandchill이 온라인에 있는 것처럼 메타버스를 만들어서 온라인에서 다 만나게끔 하자. 그리고 5개 도시는 다 다른, 그래서 우리 베를린의 이제 그로피스바우, 런던의 서펜타인, 그리고 또 그 남미와 뉴욕과 서울에서 프로젝트를 하게 됐는데, 이걸 하면서 저는 이제 그 원칙은 뭐였었냐면 어떻게 하면 카본 풋프린트를 줄일 것인가, 그리고 우리가 연결돼서 얼라이언스를 맺었을 때 우리가 서로 같아지기 위한 것이 아니고 어떻게 서로 다른 액션을 취하지만 하나의 시대 가치를 어떻게 만들어낼 것인가를 고민을 좀 했었고요. 근데 그게 그 영국과 독일 그리고 남미와 미국에서는 굉장히 잘 받아졌지만 사실 한국에서 미디어들은 이거 더 한 자리에 모여서 더 거대하게 했으면 좋았을 거에 대한 그런 피드백이 있어서 좀 아쉬웠었거든요. 여전히 스펙타클러한 이런 부분에 있어서는 여전히 한국의 정책이나 미디어에서 실제 본질을 보지 못한 게 좀 있지 않는가라는 그런 아쉬움이 좀 있었었고, 그때 5개 도시에서 하다 보니까 카본 풋프린트를 줄인 것도 좋았지만 더 궁극적으로 좋은 거는 아마추어와 커뮤니티인 사람들이 다 대거 참여를 했습니다. 각 도시에서. 너무 좋았는데 제가 여기 질문을 좀 드리면요. 그 필리핀의 관장님 같은 경우에도 펀드레이징 이슈를 많이 말씀 주셨는데 사실은 이렇게 어렵게 모였는데 이 컬렉티브 큐레토리얼 어프로치도 굉장히 어려운 거지만 어떻게 보면 이걸 통해 가지고선 컬렉티브 펀드레이징도 가능하지 않을까 생각이 좀 들고요. 그런 또 논의도 좀 하시고 계실 것 같고 그런 전략이 있으신지 좀 궁금하고, 두 번째는 이 얼라이언스가 굉장히 훌륭해요. 굉장히 지역별로 대륙별로다가 이렇게 다양한 그런 기관들이 되어 있는데 이 얼라이언스가 자칫 너무 배타적으로 되면 안 되기 때문에 향후에 또 다른 기관들을 또 참여를 시킬 수 있는 그런 또 비전을 가지고 계신 건지 라는 생각이 듭니다. 예.
Do you want to talk about collective fundraising?
Funding. Funding in the
Yeah,
Manila.
yeah. I mean, if you have any thought about instead of this kind of curatorial collective, but also it is only possible through funding.
Funding for collect, but I don't think they need funding. I think we need funding, but I think I don't think they need funding. But I don't know if they can raise funds for us. That would be fantastic.
But I think there was an interesting conversation that was raised. I mean, in the second session, M Plus and Sharjah collaborated to commission together to a specific artwork. And nowadays, I think there is more and more cases that museums collaborate together to acquire a piece.
Yes, actually, yes, yeah. With hand napkins, for example.
Exactly.
Yes.
So yeah, there are different models that are kind of emerging right now because to kind of allocate one fund in one single institution really limits the kind of way that it would kind of have the more impact to the global and helping other institutions who have lesser known but have really amazing content. So it's a win-win situations for many.
But most of this sort of funding initiatives come from the funder themselves because they know they want to put their funding towards, I guess, no? And we can only just engage with and see how to participate. I mean, for example, the hand napkins, again, I guess is a very good example of funding. And what they've done, interestingly, is to create this a great network of museums, and they fund one artist, and the artist is shown in 5 different spaces, and we're part of that. We're part of that sort of committee, and so we do show this artist, young emerging artist project that's been funded. So I think that's one way to actually engage with funding. But for us, I don't know if we should do together some sort of funding for the Philippines, for MCAD, basically. I mean, I don't know how to reply to this, really. I mean, there are models, but
Yeah, I mean, it's strategically, how do you combine like the financial sources and also the contents? I think that's the question, because like
Yeah,
no funding is
my
neutral.
question is more like when Jihoe initiated this project, I think you look at 9 institutions and your curatorial alliance. I think that is the main the element that support her ideas to get the fund. So, so my question is, it's not about the strategy to raise a fund for the one institution, but really interesting initiative or idea or curatorial, the plan means collective actions.
Oh yeah, I mean, so there were, for instance, like in terms of like financial, I don't know how much we should reveal, but so the funding was not necessarily like big in a way that it was like minimum, but more symbolic in a way that to help each institutions to bring something physical, but then artist fees and kind of like bringing the old work, the loaning process was all done individually. So it's not that like MMCA is kind of reaching out to all these different places, but it was the financial combination was like kind of mutual, I would say. So it was not in that sense, but also we kind of got funding from Meta for the second season to do public programming, and we had different like really thankful sponsors at each season. So that definitely helped us to organize an event like this also.
I mean, I guess there was counterpart funding from each institution, because I don't think it would have been possible just from the funding that was given by MMCA to fund, because the projects are not, they're modest, but they're not small. Yeah. I think those are two different things, no? Modesty and smallness, they're two different spaces to think through.
For us, we feel like we received some from them, so we need to share this chunk, and then we put more into that combining and share to the artists as well. I feel like it's also like not just only given, but it's also like sharing back, giving it, not only taken, but sharing back to the artists and community as well. That's also responsible.
Basically like seed funding, like kind of like put a seed and then like they'll have to grow somehow. But also I think like, this, what would be the next step for this kind of like institutional collaboration is an interesting question, and that's precisely why we're doing this talk today also, because like, so far this is really the kind of plan of from the MMCA, and I think we want to kind of share knowledge and kind of hear from you guys to see what would be the necessary step that the audience want, and also what you guys are looking forward to with this project. So saying that, I think we are a break time now. 지금 쉬는 시간을 잠깐 가질 텐데요. 잠깐 화장실 갔다 오시고 다시 돌아와 주시면 정말 대단히 감사하겠습니다. 저희 세컨 세션의 두 번째 세션에 M+ 샤르자 미술재단, 토너 페스티벌, 그리고 미국 피바디 SX 미술관의 큐레이터들이 이 자리에 오셔서 같이 이야기를 할 거니까요. 정확하게 4시에 시작하도록 하겠습니다. 감사합니다.